Thank you, Katie, and thank you again for including this side session on TV, because I just can't stand Piper, so I just could not watch any more than season 1. So I'm going to go on a complete left-hand turn here. This paper is the second of two papers I've written on Salome. The first one looked at biblical Salome, and Salome as seen in David McVicker's Royal Opera version of Strauss and Wilde's Salome. So this is going to be slightly different. There may be things I miss because I didn't want to self-plagiarize myself, so feel free to ask any questions at the end. So to start with, let's start with a question. Out of all the characters within the Bible, why pick Salome to turn into a vampire? Now, the answer for this, basically the whole premise of this talk, is because she already is a vampire. So, this paper will examine the biblical character of Salome as seen in the television series True Blood. Salome, whilst having a minor, albeit infamous, appearance in the biblical texts as the young girl who asks for the head of John the Baptist on a silver platter, has become an important character in popular culture. From her influence on the concept of the femme fatale to the continual fascination of artists, playwrights, and composers, Salome dominates as one of the original representations of women as monster. Salome has appeared in many different types of media. She's been played by Rita Hayworth and Jessica Chastain, has had plays and operas written about her by Oscar Wilde and Richard Strauss. She's appeared in countless pieces of art and has even, in 2009, had a video game made about her. Despite this widespread infamy, True Blood is the first time that Salome appears as a vampire. However, it shouldn't be surprising to audiences to cast Salome as a supernaturally dangerous woman, because in reality, she's been one all along. The femme fatale stereotype became a popular trope in the 19th century, defined at its most simple as a woman who would use her sexuality to bewitch or ensnare others. It's always been closely associated with Salome. Salome, possessed with the feminine powers of seduction, the dangerous sexuality of the young, and the sexual allure of forbidden love via her incestuous sexual actions, is above all a killer of men. She is known via her costume, itself a nod to the Orientalism present at the fin de Chile, of a young, beautiful woman in exotic veils. She can be identified by her femme fatale personality traits, being inward of thought, selfish, and impetuous. When depicted, Salome must always appear to have sexual allure, as it is her defining trait and her weapon. Her goals are not only the death of men, as seen in the original biblical narrative and in Oscar Wilde's version of her story, but also the dominance of men. She actively seeks to ensnare. In Wilde's version of biblical events, it's not just Salome's mother Herodias' desire for revenge, but Salome's own desire, which dictates John's death. Her sexuality, already deemed perverse due to her dance with Herod, becomes more troubling as she seeks to kiss the decapitated head of John the Baptist. Already, Salome has become a vampire as defined by Barbara Creed, as Salome enfolds her victims in an apparent or real erotic embrace. And she is a seducer par excellence with monstrous desires. So how does True Blood interpret Salome? First, I just want to mention that this is the season 3 promo poster, and there is some great Garden of Eden imagery going on in here with this giant cobra that you got going on there. So True Blood was a television series that ran from 2008 to 2014 on the American television channel HBO. Set in the fictional town of Bonton in rural Louisiana, True Blood was part of a vampire renaissance in American television and fiction in the late 2000s. Along with the CW's The Vampire Diaries and a series of prominent vampire-themed films, the Twilight series and Let the Right One In among them, True Blood was part of a dramatic reworking of the vampire mythos as seen in television and film. The vampires of True Blood were not the same as the Hammer horror era vampires. Instead, this new vampire was often a being that cared more about the preservation of the human essence than the deprivation and consumption of the human essence. Set against a backdrop of a fictional vampire civil rights movement, True Blood imagined a world in which vampires were not only real, but were out of the coffin and looking for their own place in the world. Kept apart from their blood-sucking predatory ancestors, these vampires' diets mainly consisted of a form of synthesized blood, the titular True Blood. No longer needing humans to live, this series dealt with the issues of conformity, identity, and community, rather than a simple monster narrative. The concept of otherness, always so closely linked to that of the vampire, was still present, but was instead more closely linked to alternative lifestyles. The first season of True Blood was easily identified as paralleling the gay rights movement and the AIDS epidemic narratives, rather than the Jewish ethnic otherness as seen in the Dracula texts. Within True Blood, Salome sees herself as a combination of biblical history and cultural fascination, referring to herself in an offhand manner as a symbol for women's dangerous sexuality. This combined reading of Salome is not new. As Carmen Skaggs notes, there are many faces of Salome, and one cannot read an account of the narrative in isolation from other interpretations. True Blood's Salome adds to the biblical narrative by stating that her dance for Herod was not so much a dance and more a straightforward sexual power play. Salome claims that the famous 7 veils were what she, a young virgin human, were wrapped in when she was delivered to Herod's bed, and refers to asking for John the Baptist's head as merely politics. So one question I really wanted to answer when I started researching Salome and True Blood was this: with a piece of literature as vast as the Bible, full of characters ripe for new interpretation, why select Salome as a biblical character to turn vampire? Firstly, Salome is recognizable to audiences. She is one of a group of biblical characters who exist both within the pages of the Bible and outside of the Bible in pop culture, art, and literature. As previously mentioned, Salome has been a fascination for artists and writers for decades, and is nearly the pure definition of the femme fatale, a perfect choice for a TV series' main antagonist. And surprisingly, the legend of Salome already contains many of the traits commonly found in female vampires. As I've said, it can be argued that Salome was a vampire in essence long before True Blood designed her as one. As Barbara Creed argues, the deflowering of a virgin is akin to the making of a female vampire. She is transformed from an innocent into a creature of the night who, because she is sexually awakened, is now a threatening female figure. Also, Julia Kristeva claims that the female vampire is a compound of biblical taboos. Food taboos, the drinking of blood, bodily change, the transformation both from girl to woman, human to vampire, and incest, all directly applicable to Salome and True Blood. She is a changed woman whose food is human blood and who is both a participant and victim of incest, and whose greatest desire is to become one with her vampire ancestor and mother, Lilith. The consuming of Lilith's blood is in itself an incestuous and taboo act, both in biblical terms and also in the vampire lore of True Blood. So let's take a closer look at female vampires. TV and film female vampires of the 2000s have a distinct set of stereotypes that can be roughly classed into 3 categories, or as I like to call them, the good, the bad, and the sexually deviant straight talker. So, you've got the bad. Female vampires are depicted as so mentally other to be at the point of having powers of prophecy or mind control. You're thinking Drusilla from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Alice and Jane from Twilight. Or they're duplicitous sexual deviants, Pam, Salome, Nan, and Nora from True Blood, Catherine and Rebecca from Vampire Diaries. And lastly, the good, a strand of normal, balanced female vampires. They do feature in media, but they're few and far between and are presented as patronizingly naive or young vampires. Jessica in True Blood, Caroline from Vampire Diaries, and Bella in Twilight. I've also got to point out that one thing that all these women seem to have in common is great hair. Apparently, that's what you need to be a female vampire these days. So, in True Blood, Salome fulfills many of the new stereotypes associated with the female vampire. She's duplicitous, she's bisexual, she uses her body for power, yet unlike other female vampires, she's completely hands-off when it comes to violence. Instead, she is seen repeatedly organising for others to do any dirty work that she needs done. Whilst other vampires are defined by their need and often desire to kill for blood, Salome's thirst is repeatedly stated to be for power and position. Now, Salome's actions could be motivated by her, to quote Bill in True Blood, monumental narcissism, itself a reference to Wilde's femme fatale, but could also be read as religious zeal. The Salome presented in True Blood is completely devoted to the ancient vampire religion as laid out in the Vampire Bible. This alternate text sees not Adam created first, but Lilith, created by God in his or her image, that of a vampire. According to the Vampire Bible, humans were created to feed the vampire race. Whilst many of the vampires within True Blood reject the text, one of the vampires claims that he knew the writer, who he says was definitely high when he wrote it. Salome is shown to embrace it as the literal word of God. This makes her a singular example of vampire as biblical fundamentalist. Salome wants desperately to be the prophet of Lilith. This echoing of John the Baptist's position as the prophet of Jesus is an interesting touch, and the language used by the writers is plain. Her goals are revealed to be much grander than simple worldly domination. Salome wants to be singled out by God herself. This is then not a vampire desirous of power, but rather an incredibly devoted follower of God. In writing Salome as a born-again vampire, the creators of True Blood have also reinvented the femme fatale. Instead of presenting Salome as a man-devouring monster, we are given a brand new big bad, a supernaturally empowered woman so devoted to a female god that she is willing to do whatever it takes, including give up her life in religious devotion. In conclusion, Salome has been transformed again and again via cultural interpretations that subvert her identity in a cruel, never-ending dance. The Salome that is culturally identified, that of the sexually deviant, necrophiliac femme fatale, is not just a creation of Wilde, Strauss, or True Blood, but also of every person who gazes at her, each of us alternating between taking off and adding another veil to her merely by looking at her. We are meant to be both beguiled and horrified at what we have created, as this is exactly what Salome is, an enchanting, multi-dimensional object of mutual creation and fascination. The Salome of the biblical narrative is a blank canvas on which the world has painted, depicting all the horrors of our inner desires in this ancient trope of woman as devouring monster. True Blood embraces this complex picture, and adds another layer, showing us a new femme fatale, a woman who, instead of devouring men, ignores them, and chooses instead to worship at the feet of a female god.